Commander Sarah Mitchell stood at attention in Admiral Harrison's office. Her service record spread across his mahogany desk like evidence in a court-martial. The afternoon sun streaming through the windows cast long shadows across the room, but nothing could brighten the cold atmosphere that had settled between them. Commander, your methods are unorthodox, reckless, and frankly, embarrassing to this command, Admiral Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years in the Navy. He didn't look up from the papers as he spoke, each word delivered with surgical precision. The incident in Somalia was the final straw. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. The Somalia operation had been a success by every metric that mattered. Her team had extracted the hostages without a single casualty, neutralized the terrorist cell, and gathered intelligence that prevented 3 future attacks. But Admiral Harrison saw only the deviation from protocol, the unauthorized entry into enemy territory, and the international headlines that followed. You went against direct orders, the Admiral continued, finally raising his eyes to meet hers. You put American lives at risk with your cowboy mentality. The fact that things worked out doesn't excuse your insubordination. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. She had spent 12 years climbing the ranks in a Navy that preached innovation and adaptability, yet punished those who dared to think outside the rigid structure of command. Her unconventional tactics had saved more lives than she could count, earned her the respect of every soldier she had ever led, and made her one of the youngest commanders in Navy SEAL history. Sir, with respect, the intelligence we gathered in Somalia prevented, Sarah began, but Admiral Harrison cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. I don't want to hear excuses, Commander. Your disregard for the chain of command ends here. He picked up a manila folder and slid it across the desk. You're being reassigned to Naval Station Norfolk. Administrative duties. Consider it a chance to learn how the Navy actually operates. Sarah's heart sank as she opened the folder. Norfolk was where careers went to die, a bureaucratic wasteland where ambitious officers were sent to push papers until they either quit or accepted their fate as desk jockeys. It was a clear message: conform or be forgotten. You're taking away my team? Sarah asked, her voice betraying the first hint of emotion she had allowed herself to show. Team Bravo will be reassigned to Commander Phillips. He understands the importance of following orders. Admiral Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly. Sarah, you're a good soldier, but good soldiers follow orders. Great commanders give orders that others can follow. You've never learned that distinction. The weight of those words settled on Sarah's shoulders like a heavy pack during a long march. She thought of her team, the men and women who had followed her through hell and back, who trusted her judgment, even when it went against conventional wisdom. They would be fine under Phillips. He was competent, reliable, and most importantly, predictable. Everything the Admiral valued in a commander. As Sarah left the Admiral's office, her footsteps echoed through the empty corridors of the Pentagon. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sterile, institutional glow. She passed photos of naval heroes, men who had changed the course of history through their courage and innovation. She wondered if any of them had ever been told they were too unconventional, too willing to take risks, too unwilling to follow orders that didn't make sense. The drive to Norfolk would take 4 hours. 4 hours to process the end of everything she had worked for. Sarah had joined the Navy to serve her country, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. She had endured the grueling training, the skepticism of her male colleagues, and the constant pressure to prove herself worthy of wearing the trident. Now, at 34, she was being exiled to a desk job for the crime of being too effective in an unconventional way. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lieutenant Rodriguez, her second in command. Heard about Norfolk. This is bullshit, Commander. The team stands with you. Similar messages followed from the rest of her unit, expressions of loyalty that both warmed her heart and deepened her sense of loss. That evening, as Sarah packed her belongings in her temporary quarters, she reflected on the missions that had defined her career. The hostage rescue in Yemen, where her team had improvised when their extraction plan fell apart. The counter-terrorism operation in Afghanistan, where she had trusted local intelligence over satellite imagery and prevented an ambush. The classified mission in Eastern Europe that she couldn't even discuss but had prevented an international incident. Each operation had been successful precisely because she had been willing to adapt, to trust her instincts, and to put the mission above her own career prospects. But the Navy wanted predictability, not innovation. They wanted commanders who colored inside the lines, not ones who redrew the map when necessary. As she folded her dress blues, Sarah noticed the commendation ribbons that told the story of her service. The Bronze Star for valor in combat, the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism, the Purple Heart from the IED blast in Iraq that had left her with a scar running from her left ear to her jawline. Each ribbon represented a moment when she had chosen duty over safety, mission over self-preservation. Admiral Harrison saw these decorations as evidence of a commander who took unnecessary risks. Sarah saw them as proof that sometimes the greatest risk was playing it safe when lives hung in the balance. The fundamental disconnect between their philosophies was unbridgeable, which made her reassignment inevitable. The next morning, Sarah reported to Naval Station Norfolk, a sprawling complex of administrative buildings and training facilities that served as the headquarters for the Navy's Atlantic Fleet. Her new office was on the third floor of Building 15, a windowless room that smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and broken dreams. Her new commanding officer, Captain Williams, was a pleasant man nearing retirement who had made peace with his role as a custodian of regulations and procedures. "Commander Mitchell, I've read your file," Captain Williams said as he showed her around the facility. "Quite impressive. I'm sure you'll find ways to contribute here, even if it's different from what you're used to." Sarah nodded politely, but privately doubted that filing reports and conducting safety inspections would satisfy the part of her that lived for the adrenaline of high-stakes operations. She was a thoroughbred being asked to pull a plow, a surgeon being handed a Band-Aid kit. Her first assignment was reviewing training protocols for new recruits, identifying areas for improvement in the curriculum. It was important work, she told herself. Every sailor who went through Norfolk's training programs would benefit from her experience and expertise. But as she sat in her sterile office, reading through decades-old manuals that hadn't been updated since the Cold War, she couldn't shake the feeling that her talents were being wasted. The days blended together in a monotonous routine of meetings, paperwork, and bureaucratic processes that moved at the speed of molasses. Sarah found herself checking the news obsessively, following international conflicts and wondering if her old team was involved, if they needed her experience to navigate some impossible situation. 3 weeks into her Norfolk assignment, Sarah received an encrypted message that made her blood run cold. Intelligence had identified a new terrorist cell operating in Southeast Asia, one with ties to the Somalia group her team had neutralized months earlier. The cell was planning something big, something that required immediate attention from the Navy's most experienced counterterrorism specialists. Team Bravo had been deployed under Commander Phillips, but their initial reconnaissance had gone sideways. 2 operators were missing, presumed captured, and the mission was in jeopardy. Sarah read between the lines of the official report and saw the signs of a commander who was following protocol instead of adapting to changing circumstances on the ground. The secure phone in Sarah's Norfolk office rang at 0300 hours, jolting her awake from the restless sleep she had been getting since her reassignment. The caller ID showed only a series of numbers that she recognized as Pentagon routing codes. Her heart raced as she answered, knowing that middle-of-the-night calls from Washington rarely brought good news. "Mitchell here," she said, her voice instantly alert despite the early hour. "Commander, this is Admiral Reeves, Joint Special Operations Command." The voice was crisp and urgent, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. "I need you in my office at 800. There's been a development in Southeast Asia." Sarah was already reaching for her uniform before the call ended. Admiral Reeves had a reputation as a straight shooter who cared more about results than politics, the kind of commander who evaluated officers based on their effectiveness rather than their willingness to follow outdated protocols. If he was calling her directly, something significant had happened. The pre-dawn drive from Norfolk to Washington gave Sarah time to think about what might be waiting for her. The missing operators from Team Bravo weighed heavily on her mind. Rodriguez and Chen were good soldiers, experienced operators who wouldn't have been captured unless something had gone catastrophically wrong with their mission planning. Admiral Reeves's office was a stark contrast to Admiral Harrison's pompous display of ego. The walls were covered with operational maps, unit photographs, and commendations for successful missions rather than ceremonial swords and portraits of long-dead admirals. Reeves himself was a compact man in his late 50s, with graying temples and the kind of steady gaze that came from years of making decisions under pressure. "Sit down, Mitchell," Reeves said without preamble. "I'm going to be direct because we don't have time for diplomatic language. Commander Phillips is dead, along with two other members of Team Bravo. Rodriguez and Chen are being held by the terrorist cell your team dismantled in Somalia 6 months ago." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Phillips had been a good man, perhaps too rigid in his thinking, but genuinely committed to his soldiers. The loss of life was devastating, but the capture of Rodriguez and Chen created an entirely different level of crisis. "Sir, what's the current situation?" Sarah asked, forcing herself to focus on what could be controlled, rather than dwelling on what had already been lost. Admiral Reeves activated a wall-mounted screen that displayed satellite imagery of a remote compound in the mountains of the Philippines. "The terrorist cell has established a stronghold here, approximately 40 kilometers from the nearest military installation. They're well-armed, well-funded, and they've been using Rodriguez and Chen in propaganda videos to demonstrate their capability." Sarah studied the imagery with the trained eye of someone who had planned dozens of similar operations. The compound was strategically positioned on high ground, with multiple escape routes and excellent defensive positions. It would be a nightmare to assault using conventional tactics. "The Filipino government has offered cooperation, but they lack the specialized capabilities needed for this type of operation," Reeves continued. "Every hour that passes increases the risk that Rodriguez and Chen will be moved to a location where we can't reach them, or worse." "What about the rest of Team Bravo?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The surviving members are experienced, but they're demoralized, and they lack leadership. The temporary commander assigned to replace Phillips is competent, but has no experience with this type of high-risk extraction." Reeves paused, studying Sarah's reaction. "I've read your file, Mitchell. Every classified operation, every after-action report, every commendation, and every criticism. You've never lost an operator under your command." Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Rodriguez had been with her for 4 years, a dependable soldier who had saved her life twice and never questioned her unconventional tactics. Chen was newer to the team but had proven himself in Afghanistan, displaying the kind of calm competence under fire that marked the difference between good soldiers and great ones. "Admiral Harrison made it clear that my methods are considered unacceptable," Sarah said carefully, testing the waters. Reeves snorted dismissively. "Harrison is an excellent peacetime administrator who has never commanded anything more dangerous than a retirement ceremony. This situation requires someone willing to take calculated risks to achieve an impossible mission." The Admiral activated another screen showing recent intelligence reports from the region. "The terrorist cell is led by a man named Qasim al-Rashid, a former Iraqi intelligence officer who has a personal vendetta against American special forces. He specifically requested Rodriguez and Chen because of their involvement in the Somalia operation." Sarah's blood ran cold as she processed the implications. This wasn't just a random kidnapping or a propaganda opportunity. Al-Rashid was using her former team members to bait American forces into a trap, probably hoping to inflict maximum casualties on any rescue attempt. "Sir, with respect, this feels like a suicide mission disguised as a rescue operation," Sarah said. "Al-Rashid is too smart to keep high-value prisoners in a location where they can be easily extracted." "Exactly," Reeves replied with a grim smile. "Which is why we need someone who thinks like he does, someone willing to approach the problem from an unconventional angle." He handed her a classified folder marked with security clearances she hadn't seen since her most sensitive operations. "You have 48 hours to develop a plan. Full operational authority, unlimited resources, and complete autonomy in mission planning." Sarah opened the folder and began reviewing the intelligence reports, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with accepting an impossible mission. The compound was formidable, but every fortress had weaknesses. The key was finding an approach that al-Rashid wouldn't expect, something that went against conventional military wisdom. "There's one more thing," Admiral Reeves added. "This mission is completely unofficial. If it goes wrong, the Navy will deny any involvement. You'll be operating with a hand-picked team of volunteers who understand the risks. As Sarah left the Pentagon, her mind was already working through the tactical challenges ahead. The conventional approach would be a direct assault, using overwhelming firepower to breach the compound's defenses. But al-Rashid would be expecting that, would have prepared counters for every standard operating procedure in the Special Forces playbook. The solution, when it came to her during the drive back to Norfolk, was elegantly simple in its audacity. Instead of fighting al-Rashid's strengths, she would exploit his expectations. Instead of attacking where he was strongest, she would create a weakness where none currently existed. Sarah spent the next 18 hours in her Norfolk office, using every contact and resource available to develop her plan. She reached out to former colleagues, called in favors from intelligence analysts, and studied satellite imagery until her eyes burned. The plan that emerged was unlike anything in the standard playbook, requiring precise timing and a willingness to trust in capabilities that existed more in theory than in practice. Her team would consist of 6 volunteers, each selected for specific skills that would be crucial to the mission's success. Lieutenant Jackson from SEAL Team 2 was an expert in underwater demolitions. Sergeant Martinez from Marine Force Reconnaissance had spent 2 years studying insurgent tactics in the Middle East. Chief Petty Officer Thompson was a communications specialist who could hack into virtually any electronic system. The most crucial addition to her team was Dr. Emily Foster, a civilian contractor who specialized in psychological operations. Foster's expertise would be essential for the deception that formed the core of Sarah's plan. If they could convince al-Rashid that he was facing a conventional assault from one direction while the real rescue team approached from another, they might be able to extract Rodriguez and Chen before the terrorists realized what was happening. The briefing took place in a secure conference room at Norfolk, with Admiral Reeves attending via encrypted video link. Sarah outlined her plan with the confidence that came from thorough preparation and absolute certainty in her approach. The compound has excellent defensive positions against ground assault, but it's vulnerable to psychological manipulation, she began, pointing to key locations on the satellite imagery. Al-Rashid expects us to value American lives above mission success. We're going to use that expectation against him. Her plan called for creating the appearance of a large-scale rescue operation approaching from the south, complete with helicopter insertions and diversionary explosions. Meanwhile, her actual team would infiltrate from the north using underwater approach routes that reconnaissance had revealed in recent satellite imagery. The timing has to be perfect, Sarah emphasized. If al-Rashid realizes the southern assault is a feint before we reach Rodriguez and Chen, they'll be executed immediately. Admiral Reeves asked several probing questions about contingencies and escape routes, testing the thoroughness of Sarah's planning. Each answer demonstrated the level of detail that had made her legendary among Special Forces operators. She had considered variables that most commanders would overlook, prepared for complications that seemed impossible until they happened. As the briefing concluded, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of standing on the edge of a precipice. In 12 hours, she would be leading her team into harm's way, betting their lives on her ability to outthink a cunning enemy who had already proven capable of destroying experienced operators. The extraction began at 0200 hours under a moonless sky that provided perfect cover for Sarah's unconventional approach. Her team moved through the water like shadows, using rebreathers to avoid detection as they navigated the underground river system that led directly beneath al-Rashid's compound. The psychological operation was proceeding exactly as planned 2 kilometers to the south. Dr. B. Foster's team had created the perfect illusion of a large-scale assault, complete with helicopter sounds, explosions, and radio chatter designed to convince al-Rashid that a conventional rescue operation was underway. Every element had been calibrated to reinforce the terrorist leader's expectations about American tactics. Sarah's earpiece crackled with updates from the diversion team. Tango 1. This is Overwatch. Primary target is repositioning forces to southern perimeter. Repeat. All hostile forces moving to anticipated assault vector. Perfect. Al-Rashid was reacting exactly as Sarah had predicted, concentrating his defenses against a threat that didn't exist while leaving the actual infiltration route completely undefended. It was a textbook example of using an enemy's tactical expertise against them. The underwater approach had been the most dangerous part of the plan. The river system beneath the compound was partially collapsed, requiring the team to navigate through spaces barely wide enough for a human body. Chief Petty Officer Thompson had nearly been trapped when his equipment snagged on submerged debris, saved only by Lieutenant Jackson's quick thinking and underwater cutting tools. As they emerged from the water inside the compound's basement level, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that marked the transition from planning to execution. Everything depended on the next 30 minutes. They had to locate Rodriguez and Chen, neutralize any guards, and extract without alerting the main force of terrorists who were currently focused on the fake assault. Sergeant Martinez took point, his experience with insurgent tactics proving invaluable as they moved through the compound's lower levels. The terrorists had converted what appeared to be an old monastery into a fortified position, but they had focused their security measures on preventing assault from outside rather than infiltration from below. The first guard was neutralized silently, never knowing what hit him. The second required more finesse, taken down by Dr. Foster using a tranquilizer that would keep him unconscious for hours without permanent harm. Sarah's team moved like ghosts through corridors that should have been heavily defended, but were nearly empty due to the success of the diversion. Rodriguez and Chen were being held in what had once been the monastery's chapel, a fitting irony that wasn't lost on Sarah as she observed their position through night vision equipment. Both men appeared injured but alert, their training evident in the way they had positioned themselves to take advantage of any rescue opportunity. Two guards flanked the chapel entrance, their attention focused on radio reports from the southern assault. Sarah could hear al-Rashid's voice over their communications, coordinating his response to the threat he believed was coming. His tactical competence was evident in his instructions, which made the success of the deception even more satisfying. The takedown had to be simultaneous and silent. Martinez and Jackson moved with surgical precision, eliminating both guards without a sound. Sarah was already moving toward Rodriguez and Chen before the bodies hit the ground, her medical training taking over as she assessed their condition. "Commander," Rodriguez whispered, his voice hoarse but filled with disbelief. "How did you—" Later, Sarah cut him off, checking his injuries while Thompson worked on the electronic locks securing their restraints. "Can you move?" Chen nodded weakly, though the bruising on his face suggested he had been interrogated roughly. "They were planning to move us tomorrow. Some kind of public execution to demonstrate their capabilities." The radio chatter from al-Rashid's forces was becoming more agitated. The diversionary assault was reaching its crescendo, with explosions and gunfire creating the perfect auditory cover for the actual extraction. But Sarah knew they had minutes at most before someone realized that the southern assault wasn't as substantial as it appeared. "Thompson, how long for the locks?" she asked, watching the chapel entrance while her communications specialist worked. 30 seconds, Commander. These are sophisticated, but nothing I can't handle." Those 30 seconds felt like an eternity. Sarah could hear footsteps in the corridor above, guards moving to reinforce positions that were already being overwhelmed by what they thought was a major American assault. The entire deception hinged on al-Rashid maintaining his focus on the wrong threat for just a few more minutes. The locks disengaged with soft clicks that sounded like thunderclaps in the quiet chapel. Rodriguez and Chen moved stiffly but under their own power, their training overriding the pain from their injuries. Sarah handed them sidearms from her equipment bag, knowing that the extraction route would be far more dangerous than the infiltration. The return journey through the compound's lower levels was complicated by Rodriguez's injured leg, but the team adapted quickly to the slower pace. Martinez scouted ahead while Jackson provided rear security, both men moving with the fluid coordination that marked elite operators. They had reached the basement access to the river system when the first shouts of alarm echoed through the compound above. Someone had discovered the unconscious guards or noticed the missing prisoners. The diversion would no longer be effective once al-Rashid realized he had been deceived. "Move! Move! Move!" Sarah ordered, pushing her team toward the water as the sounds of pursuit grew louder behind them. The river extraction would be the most vulnerable part of the operation, with injured personnel and limited mobility, until they reached the pickup point 2 kilometers downstream. The water was shockingly cold after the heated compound, but it provided immediate concealment as al-Rashid's forces began a frantic search of the surrounding area. Sarah could hear him screaming orders over the radio, his tactical composure finally cracking as he realized how completely he had been outmaneuvered. Rodriguez struggled with the underwater breathing apparatus, his injuries making it difficult to maintain the steady rhythm required for extended submersion. Sarah stayed close to him, ready to provide assistance if his condition worsened. Chen was doing better, his natural stubbornness overriding his physical limitations. The extraction boat was waiting exactly where it should be, manned by Navy personnel who had been briefed only on the essential details of the operation. As Sarah's team was pulled aboard, she allowed herself the first moment of relief she had felt since receiving Admiral Reeves's call 3 days earlier. The journey back to the USS Montgomery took 40 minutes, time Sarah used to treat Rodriguez and Chen's injuries and debrief her team on the operation's success. Every element had performed flawlessly, from the psychological deception to the underwater infiltration to the precision timing that had made the extraction possible. Admiral Reeves was waiting in the Montgomery's communications center when they arrived, his presence via secure video link a testament to the operation's significance. Behind him, Sarah could see other senior officers observing the debrief, including several faces she didn't recognize but whose bearing suggested very high rank. "Outstanding work, Commander," Admiral Reeves said as Sarah finished her preliminary report. "Your tactical innovation saved 2 American lives and demonstrated capabilities that our adversaries didn't know we possessed." Over the following weeks, the full implications of the operation became clear. Al-Rashid's terrorist cell had been completely neutralized, their financing network exposed, and their planned attacks prevented. The intelligence gathered during the rescue had provided crucial information about terrorist operations throughout Southeast Asia. But perhaps more importantly, Sarah's approach had been studied and adopted as a new model for special operations planning. Her willingness to challenge conventional wisdom, to use psychological deception rather than overwhelming force, had revolutionized thinking about hostage rescue and counterterrorism operations. The ceremony took place 6 weeks later in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, attended by senior officials from every branch of the military. Admiral Harrison was notably absent, having announced his early retirement shortly after news of the successful operation reached the highest levels of Navy leadership. Sarah stood at attention as Admiral Reeves read the citation for her Navy Cross, the service's highest decoration for valor. The words seemed to echo in the vast hall as he described her extraordinary heroism and tactical brilliance in the face of overwhelming odds. But the moment that meant the most to Sarah came afterward, when the surviving members of SEAL teams from across the country requested permission to approach. One by one, these elite warriors saluted her, their respect evident in every gesture. "Commander," said Master Chief Rodriguez, his injuries healed but his memory of the rescue operation still fresh. "It's an honor to serve under your command." Similar sentiments were echoed by dozens of other operators, men and women who represented the pinnacle of military professionalism. They understood what Sarah had accomplished, how her willingness to think differently had not only saved lives but had expanded the boundaries of what was possible in special operations. As the ceremony concluded, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Admiral Harrison's dismissal had seemed like the end of her career, a punishment for refusing to conform to rigid expectations about how military operations should be conducted. Instead, it had become the catalyst for her greatest achievement. The months at Norfolk had given her time to think, to develop new approaches that combined traditional military excellence with innovative tactical thinking. Her exile had become an incubator for the ideas that would reshape special operations doctrine. The final vindication came in the form of her new assignment, commanding officer of the Navy's Special Operations Development Group, a newly created unit tasked with developing unconventional approaches to impossible missions. It was a position that recognized her unique capabilities while giving her the autonomy to continue pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Standing in the Pentagon hallway after the ceremony, surrounded by fellow officers who had once questioned her methods, Sarah understood that true leadership wasn't about following orders blindly. It was about having the courage to challenge conventional thinking when lives were at stake, the wisdom to innovate under pressure, and the dedication to serve something greater than personal advancement. The Admiral had dismissed her, seeing only insubordination where others would later recognize genius. But the SEALs who saluted her name understood what really mattered in the world of special operations. Results achieved through courage, innovation, and an unwavering commitment to bringing every team member home alive. In the end, that was the only evaluation that truly counted,